Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, I am excited to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. As you know, the festival is dedicated to celebrating courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring their stories to life. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Corey Luco, and I'm a programmer and the operations assistant here at the Athena Film Festival. I would like to mention, of course, that this year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. So please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes this festival possible. I would also like to thank our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, who shares our commitment to showcasing women in science and bringing those stories to the screen. To all of our sponsors, whose names you will see on your screens before each film and event, thank you so much for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring our audiences in the process. So this past year has been a wake-up call in many ways. And when we were putting together our virtual festival, we wanted to make sure that we were really digging deeper this year into our programming. So we came up with 8 different program areas that react and respond to our current moment. So you've just watched the shorts program for our program area, Nothing About Us Without Us. In this program, we are delving into this rallying cry, Nothing About Us Without Us, which began in the disability rights movement in South Africa in 1993. But since then, this has been applied to many different movements and causes. So in this program area, we want to dive into representation and how in these times of great change, we keep asking ourselves, who is this change serving and who is leading this change? So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm excited to welcome our filmmakers to this conversation. I'm going to throw it to them to introduce themselves. So Ashley, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my name is Ashley Eakin. I'm the writer-director of the short film Single.
And Dorothy?
Hi, I'm Dorothy, and I'm the director of Material Bodies, which I also edited.
Wonderful. Thank you all again so much for being here to talk with me about your films today. And I think we should just dive right in. This is really exciting for me because we have 2 very different films. We have a narrative, sort of comedy, and then we have a really poetic, beautiful doc. So we're going to get into some good conversation right now. So my question to both of you to just start us off is really talking about how did you come to this story? Why did you want to tell this story? Both of your films talk about really highlight disability and accessibility. And so what brought you to that? What brought you to want to tell a story about that? So Ashley, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, so I have been in the industry for about 10 years, and a lot of my experience was assisting different directors, producers, and executives. And I kind of came to wanting to realize that I wanted to direct, I think about 5 years ago. And I was born with a physical disability. It's a rare bone disease. And I never really wanted to focus on stories about disability, let alone I never even identified with the word disability at this time, because I had so much internalized ableism, and I was so ashamed of my body that I almost had like a cognitive dissonance from my bone disease, which is a whole weird, interesting thing, which is kind of, highlighted in the short a little bit. But my big thing about disability, that once I started to find community and once I started to really like come to terms and accept this part of myself, which is, a big part of my identity and who I am and why I am the way I am. I realized that there's a huge lack of disability representation, and also things that talk about disability and dating and relationships. And it's always been a part that I have navigated with a lot of challenges, in the sense of never seeing myself represented, or these discussions being had talking about what it's like to date someone who has a different type of body or is dealing with a disability. And so, I did a lot of dating after a breakup when I was in my 20s, and
as
we all do.
Yeah.
And, I ended up going on a date with a guy who has a disability, and it's very kind of like a minor disability. Mine's definitely more visible than his. And I could not get over the idea that people were like staring at us being like, oh, this disabled couple together. And that feeling really bothered me that I had. And this was when I was very insecure about my disability and was not even wanting to be involved in the community. And that idea kind of carried over into this short film of like people thinking that disabled people belong together. And I actually have met a huge group of women who, I went to this camp. I reluctantly went to this camp where there was a bunch of other women who had disabilities. And I was kind of like, is this going to be something that I want to do? And like, I was still coming to terms with like the community aspect of disability. And I met these women and they're just like amazing, sassy, badass, like people that you never see revolving around the word disability or the community. Now I know so many people that I'm almost like people with disability are badass because they're always having to adapt and change, and the world isn't made for us. But
absolutely.
I met these people and our biggest conversation was about dating, and a couple of girls were like, we've been set up on dates that are with another person who has one arm, and they didn't realize until they stalked them on Facebook. And just the idea of coming to terms with your own internalized ableism through being presented with someone who is like you. And I think that is really where this whole idea formed, and then it was produced through the AFI directing workshop for women. So it was, I don't know, I think this is 2018 when I first came up with the idea. Now it's been like, 3 years of my life. So.
Wow. That's an incredible journey. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Looks like Dorothy may have dropped off. Hopefully she will come back and be able to rejoin us. But yeah, what I love so much about your film is I'm a comedian and a writer, and I also have an invisible disability. And so I feel, especially in like comedic stories, when you see disability on screen, it's usually part of the joke, rather than the joke being something like the joke being like, this person all of a sudden realizing the person they've been set up with also has a disability. And then that sort of being where like the tension and the comedy comes from. So, oh, yay. Hey, Dorothy. Wonderful. So, I'll ask you about that after we go to Dorothy, just sort of the idea of like telling this story about representation and disability, like in the comedy sphere. I think it's really, really incredible. But Dorothy, if you want to talk quickly about sort of how you came to your project, which is, obviously a very, very artistic, very beautiful, poetic sort of project, and where that came from.
Sure. Can you hear me? I just want to check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, everything sounds good.
Okay, cool. I'll transfer back onto my computer in a minute. It just completely crashed and burned.
No, you're all set. Don't worry about it.
Okay, cool. So to just quickly introduce Material Bodies, I made it with one of my oldest best friends, Caitlin McMullen, who she's been disabled her whole life. And essentially a lot of my kind of insight into the experience of people with disabilities comes through, growing up with her, particularly when we were teenagers. And she found out just over 5 years ago that she had to have her leg amputated. And the day before her operation, we went around Glasgow, where she lives, making a film together. And I point and shoot, really straightforward documentary. And it was documenting, I guess, a lot of her life up until that point. And she's very funny and takes the mick out of people's prejudices and preconceptions. And there's a real lightness in the way she speaks about it, but then also it's really, really hard hitting. And obviously this huge turning point in her life. So we made that doc, which was called Old Pal, I think about 6 years ago. And that was one of the first short documentaries I ever made. And then she got really interested in prosthetics and the design of prosthetics, and essentially how they can be more than just something that is functional, technical, but how they have a funny relationship. And in some ways they're part of your body, but they're also really not. And because basically because she's very fashionable. She wants her prosthetic to be something more than just this functional thing. So she was doing this project researching the material qualities of prosthetics and looking at the design of them and speaking with lots of prosthetics wearers. And that was basically she was doing this research, and there was scope to make a film about that very particular research, which would be to essentially give to design prosthetists, so the designers. And I kind of thought there was scope to broaden the conversation and make it not so focused on the materials, or basically to make that one film that serves that function, but then also to make a more poetic, open documentary that documents people's relationships with their prosthetics and approaches it in different ways. And we just kind of kept talking about it, and I felt like having a dancer. So Material Bodies is a kind of dance documentary, and I just think that there's a lot that can be said, and can be spoken about people's relationships, but also just seeing, if it's all about this connection, actually just seeing someone, use their prosthetic and dance also says a lot. Yeah. And really situates it within a kind of a like built up urban environment. So that was it. And we made it in lots of different stages, did lots and lots of interviews. It ended up being 4 minutes, even though we had 6 hours of interviews. Then we did the filming of the dance sequence, and it was all very kind of improvised. And that was why I edited it, because I kind of I wouldn't have known how to even give instructions to an editor. I just had these different things I wanted to film and muddled through and worked out how to bring them together. And it was actually when I listened to this track by Batsumi, who interestingly are a South African group, and I didn't realize that Nothing About Us Without Us came from South Africa. So that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I listened to that song in the background while editing. And Michaela, the dancer's movements just went so perfectly with that, and actually having that track everything just fell into place then.
That's incredible. Very cool. So yeah, actually, we can jump back to that question, sort of more specific to like comedy genre. Because I mean, I don't know if you sort of see your film as a comedy, but I definitely, see it playing in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't intend to like set out to make a comedy. Mm-hmm. But I think what I've realized is like comedy is such an accessible way for people to understand a perspective and to really like not feel heavy from like maybe the more parts that seem unfair or an injustice or something of people being judged upon. It's not, I didn't want it to have that thing that disability usually has in stories where we really feel pity for them and, are wanting them to, be cured or something like that. And I think having the comedy come from more the lead characters, like actions and her sassiness and her boldness and the way she deals with things. Yeah, it's like who she is almost, it's laughing at almost the absurdity of things that she's experiencing. So I honestly never, I mean, my film before this was very kind of dramatic and really kind of hits you emotionally. And this one, I don't know. I think there's elements of that, but I've really kind of been moving into a space where I'm like, comedy is fun. It's fun. And it's a way to talk about serious things that really you make them laugh and then you hit them with the real stuff, and then it resonates with people instead of just trying to, really hammer in these things that, people may have issues with accepting their own identity or, what do we think about the word disabled? Why do we have a prejudice against it? And why are people not wanting to identify with it? That was a very eye-opening experience for me when, someone made a joke about me being disabled. And I remember at the time I was like, what? You see me as disabled? And I was so went back to my office. I was almost in tears. And I was like, what is this reaction to this word? And really breaking it down of what does that mean that I think about the disabled community? Why have I been so scared of this? And ever since I took kind of claim over that word. I feel like it's like changed my life, because I've just been like, you know, all these things that society builds into you of like our ableist culture, is you really realize it's not your own fault. I think I felt very heavy that I had this burden against a community that I was like born into, you know, and I am disabled, and I was like, but I'm not, you know, and trying to push it away. But once I was like, you know, being disabled doesn't mean you only can be certain things. It's like you can be disabled and be successful and do, you know, all these things. And like, I think our world is like disabled is like a bad label, you know, and it's really, I've been really trying to like like what I want to do in my films is like diversify our narrative so people can't put us in a box, you know, and go, all disabled people are like that, you know. And that's why when I created this film, I was like, I kind of want to make an unlikable character who's like sassy and bold, because usually the people who are disabled in films are like, you know, especially if they're born with it, it's like they're like the angel kind of like model minority perfect person who's just like, you know, they either uplift the newly disabled person and show them like the good parts of life, or, you know, it's like, I wanted someone who kind of had this like disgruntled attitude. And I think that's where the comedy came from, of just being like unapologetic and raw with her, you know, dialogue. And, you know, it's me not being afraid of what people are going to think if I just like write this from a perspective that is kind of like an alter ego of who I am, you know? So that's where that kind of came out.
I love that. And I love what you know, the idea, just talking about like embracing the idea of feeling disabled, you know, it's like with my own journey, you know, it's such a moment. And for me, it felt like I shied away from it for a long time, but then it felt so freeing. I feel like to really step into it, and like, because there's such an incredible community around it. Yeah, so I love that, and that really, I feel like that really comes through in the film, which is really wonderful. So I want to talk to both of you a little bit about, I guess that it's a little bit different, but sort of like casting. So how you came to find your lead, and then also Dorothy, how you originally came to find this dancer who, like, you know, is really the focal point of the piece for you. So whoever wants to take that.
Well, so all of the contributors who speak in the documentary were people who Caitlin found in her research, and I think she targeted some specific kind of disability rights groups, and through kind of, I think, research connections, found some people. Some it was just through Instagram, you know, people whose public profiles, like, they make a point of speaking about their experience of disability on social media. So that was all kind of piecing it together. One person was randomly sat next to the costume designer, and the costume designer was telling them about this project she was working on to do with prosthetics. And then Daniel, who's one of the contributors, was like, I've got a prosthetic. So they were then involved. And with Michaela, the dancer, she's part of a very well-known dance company. Well, she's actually now left, but called Kanduko. And I have done some work with them, filming their workshops, and just always loved their choreography and the work that they put on. And so I'd seen her doing quite a lot of choreographed pieces for stage, and some stuff for TV. I don't know if you have a program, Strictly Come Dancing, but it's like the big hit here.
Very cool.
And it's getting celebrities dancing. And Michaela and Kanduko did this big performance on that was brilliant. And so I got her involved and spoke to her about, would she be interested in something that was more improvised and less choreographed. And I think a lot of dancers are just very poetic, but she was incredible. She would touch the walls and the concrete and like get all of this energy and these ideas and inspiration from the built up environment. And we just really felt our way through that. And it was really nice, rather than editing a kind of choreographed routine, just having movements and piecing it together, really like feeling it out.
Yeah. And how did that change how you shot it and how you approached the shooting process?
So the DOP, Jack Wells, who I work with quite a lot, is I love working with him on projects like that because he's all up for experimenting and
Mm-hmm.
just bringing together different elements on the day, bringing a few cameras along, 16mm camera and his digital camera, and speaking to Michaela and saying, okay, show us some moves, and we look at it and really improvising it, no shot lists.
Right.
Like, we didn't have much of an idea of what we were going to shoot that day. We just went around and explored the Barbican step by step, which is this big brutalist art centre. And then the same for the studio shoot. So when we were filming the actual materials and everything, that was Marianne Uvenet Gould, who's a brilliant art director, and she just brought a ton of materials and made the set. And with Jack, we just looked at everything and composed things and thought, what about that with this movement? And yeah, and we knew that we wanted to shoot as much as we could on 16mm just because it's all about texture and materials. Yeah.
Right. That's very cool. I like how, the dancers' influence of just like their improvisation really, comes into the whole creative process, and just the way that you all are like being able to film this happening. It's very cool. And Ashley, as you know, we've talked a lot about your lead character because she's just so incredible. And I'm just wondering what that casting process was like to find her.
Yeah. The thing about casting people with disabilities is like, there's not a plethora of well-known, disabled actors. There's definitely amazing people out there who are incredible, but sometimes when you're looking for a specific attitude or energy, and especially with this piece, it had a sass and a bite that is very specific. And I was casting from like January until, I think we locked her in, like May or something. And a lot of it, I had a professional casting director on who's my friend, and she knows my mission of wanting to get more disabled actors on screen. And we've done this before on a previous short, and it was really tough to find someone who would match. So we ended up, and it wasn't disability specific, the last short. I was just like wanting to get someone in there. But we ended up not doing it because it was more of a metaphorical film, and it kind of worked better. But with this one, I was like, this definitely has to be, someone who was born with one arm or has some type of disability. I was even, casting and auditioning people who had totally different disabilities than what we ended up with in the film.
Right.
And I also like stalk people on Instagram to find them. I mean, that's like the best place because the community of disabled people is so open now. When I was growing up, even 5 years ago, no people that I knew, at least, I know they were out there, but were openly posting about their disability. They were hiding it, and I was hiding it. So it's like, you couldn't find these people just by hashtags or by following, the community or getting to know other people. And now it's like, people are so wanting to put themselves out there, and it's really great to like find people and go, hey, would you want to audition for this thing? I probably auditioned like 50 women through Instagram reach out. And it's like, half of them probably thought I was crazy because I'm like, will you send me this tape of yourself, like doing these lines? And it was so, it was something where I had to like explain myself 50 times, being like, this is through AFI. Like, it's this whole thing. Yeah. Trying to legitimize myself. But we ended up going with Delaney, which my casting director found. And she was like the only person who could really get that bite and sass. And like, she did some improvisation that was just really smart and that I loved. And, we ended up going with her. And Jake, the guy, he actually was on Real World. His name's Jordan Wisely. And Kim is Delaney Feener. That's her name. And Jake, I actually, when I was going to write this, I had him in mind because I always like to find people and then like write it just with them in my head. So it could be kind of like a consistent character. And, he was on the Real World. He's like a reality TV guy. He's on the Real World, or like the Challenge on MTV.
Wait a second. Really? Okay. Because I had like an unhealthy obsession with the Challenge when I was a child.
Yeah. He's like, he actually won the last season, which I didn't know. We didn't know when we shot. He just won it and he couldn't tell us what happened. And I was like, I don't know if he's going to be like bummed because he lost, or if he like is going to be kind of secretive and he actually won, which he did. But I knew he was like a reality TV star. I followed him through kind of like the disability community, and he also was like a model. And I was like, there's no way this guy's going to be able to act. Like, you can't be like the trifecta, you know, like an athlete and a model. And then he's also like a great actor. And most of these people that I reach out to on Instagram, like lovely, amazing people, but not actors, you know, and you're like, the issue is like with disability, you know, representation, like it has to be good acting or else people aren't going to buy the story. You know, and so I was like, you know, we auditioned him. We had him come in and another guy. And, you know, I think he was our second audition and he was just like amazing and so natural and charming and just like, I was kind of in shock. Me and my casting director were like, he's it. Like this is it, you know? And I think because when I from what I knew on Instagram about him, I wrote it kind of with him in mind. So it almost is like who he is in a way, you know, just like a nice, like, guy who's charming, you know, but also just kind of like has this mellow attitude about his disability. And I mean, he was great. And he actually read against a ton of women with us because we found him before we found Delaney. Gotcha. And so we were doing, you know, he was reading with a ton of people and he was just so up for like coming in and you know, trying things out. And he was like imperative to the, you know, to the process and finding the person who matched to have Kim. And they had they had to do a virtual like audition. It's funny because that first audition, it was like where they were reading off of each other, like a chemistry test. And it was so good. And then the computer crashed and the Zoom didn't save. This was before Zoom was like a thing. And we were like, what is this Zoom thing? And it's crashing. And we were so sad, but you know, they did it again and they're great. So it was, it was definitely like a long process and finding that person wasn't like, they were just, you know, there.
Yeah, so, that's an incredible story. And I can't believe I didn't honestly recognize him from the challenge because like I said, unhealthy relationship with that show. So I just want to ask both of you as we close out here, because, you know, what we're really focusing on in this program area in so many ways is this representation and like how it's so powerful to be able to see these stories on screen. And I'm just wondering, you know, what reactions have you gotten from audiences, you know, to these films?
I would say, well, in some ways, no concrete reaction because it's been released after COVID. So I've actually almost never watched it with people. So who knows? But I would say, I mean, Material Bodies has got into lots of really great British and international film festivals. And it's had a really, really good response. And most festivals, you know, it's brilliant that your festival has this particular program around disability films, but actually a lot of the other, like Sheffield Doc Fest, it's going to be screening at Ann Arbor, they don't have those kind of categories and they're still interested in this, which is great. You know,
it's beautiful.
It's really cool. And there's a huge ginormous lack of representation of disabled people's experiences, you know, and then working in film in front and behind the camera. Huge. And we're not really talking about it in the way that we are talking about the absence of representation of other marginalized groups. So I'm not kind of kidding myself that like it's the dawning of a new era. But I would say just from the response I've had to Material Bodies and just the fact that it's been programmed and it's when it's screened at the festivals, it's going to go online. And I think that it's actually going to go online on a platform that is curating a season on films to do with disability. So I think maybe, hopefully, the way that we had, you know, a real surge in conversation around racism and with the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer and with the Me Too movement to do with women's rights and, you know, and kind of, and things around harassment, hopefully, I really hope there's something equivalent around disabled people's rights, and not even just their rights, but everyday experiences. It would be great if that could be sparked. It doesn't feel like it's there yet, but hopefully with just greater knowledge around the intersections of, you know, all of these different issues, hopefully people will just get it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashley, was your film also, I think, came out you've been doing the virtual circuit, but I'm sure that people,
Yeah, it's been really amazing. And I mean, the best people that I love getting reactions from are disabled people. And, you know, one of my friends, she's also a disabled actor, and I sent it to her early on, and she sent me like a video back of her like crying. And it's not really a film where you cry, but it's like, it's seeing yourself in any way represented in a story is like so powerful. I mean, I used to work for John Chu, who did Crazy Rich Asians, and that was I was on that whole trajectory of that film with him, and seeing how that film affected Asian Americans, just to see them represented in like a hot guy, you know, a hot male Asian lead who's not like the nerdy computer guy, or they're not like a sexualized, exotic, you know, Asian woman. It's just like they're people with like more complex stories. That I really took that, what happened, and witnessing that whole experience and going, this has to happen for like the disabled community, because we never see ourselves represented, you know. And I mean, I wish growing up I had anything about dating. I mean, I went in being like, you know, I can remember like going on those forums where you ask questions when I was younger, like on the internet, and being like, if you have a different body, but people tell you you're pretty, you know, that you have a pretty face, which is something that people would always say to me. And I'm like, what does that mean when you say you have a pretty face? Like, is the rest of you not pretty? Like, it's just such a weird compliment, where I would like ask on these forums, like, if you have a different body, like, would someone still be, you know, would someone date you? Before I was like dating anyone. And it's like people will respond back of like thinking it was like a weight thing, you know, and you're like, and I'm like, no, they're not getting it. But I couldn't say like, I'm disabled, because that word was just so like, I couldn't put that, you know, down on paper at the time when I was like in high school. And I think that's what you hope is like, you can have things that help describe someone's experience in like an accurate way, you know. And there's a lot of people right now who are like, I love when they're disabled people represented, but they don't mention the disability at all. And I'm like, that's just not, for me, those aren't the stories that I like, because I'm always having to mention, like, it's almost the elephant in the room. People see that my body's clearly different, and they're like, I want to know more, what's going on there, you know. And to not mention it is, you know, it takes away this experience of like, you're going to eventually have to talk about it in some capacity, especially with dating, you know. And I think like I've had a very serious relationship that was like, we didn't talk about it at all. And then now I'm married, and my husband, we talk about it all the time. And it's something that like, it's way better that way, where you're talking about, you know, like ideology, or even just like physical things that you can potentially do and not do. And, you know, it's just, I want to see stuff and represent, you know, the stories that I'm working on and putting out there, and really have like an angle of explaining it and talking about it. And hopefully eventually, once we do cover all of that stuff, like other, you know, underrepresented communities, you don't have to talk about it anymore. But I think we're still at a place where like, it does have to be talked about.
That
makes sense. So.
Thank you both so much for being here. This has been such an incredible conversation, and I've loved hearing more about your films. I feel like I got to watch them all over again in my head. So thank you both so much, and thank you for your films. Is there anything, like one last thing you want to say before we leave?
Yeah, thank you. And I can't wait to see Single. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, same. I'm excited. I want to see yours. My last short had dance involved in it, so I'm so curious like I'm excited that there's something out there like this, so I can't wait.
Well, I feel exactly the same with yours. Caitlin and I are talking about how we really want to make, or at least see, a feature film, you know, a feature drama starring basically just like a bolshy, loud, young disabled woman. And so much of what you said feeds into kind of thoughts and ideas and conversations we're having. So yeah, I can't wait to see yours, a bit more inspiration.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. So cool.
All right. Thank you both so much. It's been so wonderful.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.